Welcome back to the Pastor Pod. We're so glad you're with us for another podcast. If you're new with us, I'm Josh, pastor here in Venice, Florida at the Bridge Church, and I'm here every amazing week with my good friend Jay Mudd, who's a pastor up at Milestone Church in Massachusetts. And we are all about having honest and open conversations on what pastors really think about stuff. So we're really glad that you're joining us. Jay, hope you're doing well. And today we have some special guests that we're going to get to in just a minute, but I cannot wait for this conversation. It's going to be a lot of fun today.
I actually wasn't sure where you were going with that when you were like, always, you drew it out like it was a little nerve-wracking. I was like, what's he going to say?
Just want to emphasize that I love every week with you.
Well, but it was almost too much to where it was like making you question. Josh, good to be here. Good to be on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to the conversation as well. We do have people that we know really, really well. You are joined by your worship pastor. Is it pastor director? I don't know how these titles work. But
worship pastor.
There you go. Good. I don't know.
And Aaron actually oversees our student ministry as well. So he does a lot for our church.
Grayson's gonna have to step
Aaron
up
Miller
his game.
is here.
Oh boy.
He is an incredible guy. So Aaron, we're glad you're here. Welcome to the Pastor Pod.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And I'm joined with Grayson Atkins, who's our creative arts director. Grayson does not oversee our students. I actually don't know what Grayson does. Actually, all joking aside, Grayson has his plate full each and every week. He not only leads us in worship every week, but he also oversees all of the technology, all of the graphic design, all of the creative artsy stuff that I don't want to deal with. And so, Grayson, I'm glad to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man, glad to be here. It's going to be fun.
Okay, so I'd love to meet our guests a little bit before we get into our deeper conversation. So, Aaron, if you would do us a favor, give us a short synopsis. Tell us, a little bit about your, we know you have kids, so introduce us to your family a little bit and, tell us something you're passionate about.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest, born in Indianapolis, kind of grew up in Indiana and Ohio, and made my way down to Sarasota, Florida back in 2005. I was a junior in high school, and that's where I met Amanda Beachy, who would become my wife, Amanda Miller. And so we've been married 10 years, and we have 3 girls, age 7, 4, and 2. And if we had another, we're probably done having our own kids, but if we had another, I'd want another girl. It is like so fun to be a girl dad. And I'm just like terrified of the prospect of if I had a boy, what would I do with him? At this point, I'm just like good with girls. So,
Awesome.
So I love it. I love being a dad. And I went to Southeastern University for college, where I got a theology degree. And then I got hired on in Venice, Florida, as soon as I graduated to be youth pastor. And eventually that morphed into being youth and worship pastor. And I love doing both. My dad was both when I was growing up. He was a worship pastor and student pastor. And he went back and forth from doing that to being a math teacher. So he was a mathematician that God called into ministry. And every now and then he'd switch back and forth. So I love my dad, though. And so I think I was just inspired by him. And just love living in Venice and love being at the Bridge Church, too. I've been really blessed to be part of a really cool church. And so, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I know Josh tells me about that island life all the time, living on the island out there. So, Grayson, you don't get to live on an island. You're living in New England, but the world wants to know a little bit more about you. So tell us about your wife and your dog and all that fun stuff.
Well, I might leave the dog out of it for today, but yeah, I married my wife 8 years ago in May.
Woo-woo.
We were high school sweethearts from like 14, 15 years old, and it just stuck. But yeah, I've been in ministry for as long as I can remember. My mom was a women's ministry director and the associate worship director at the church I grew up at. So I've kind of grown up hyper involved in worship ministry, and kind of officially felt and accepted that call, kind of made a public profession at 18. Went to school for worship ministry at William Carey University in Mississippi. I'm originally from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I've moved around a ton. Most of my family is based out of Tallahassee, Florida, so I've spent most of my time in Florida. And then during my time in school, I accepted a job at First FBC Leesburg, where I met Jay. So it's kind of a weird circular story that I ended up here in the Boston area with him. But that was the first time that I got to hear a little bit about what was going on in Boston, specifically Metro West Boston, and he and Holly's heart about reaching these people. And I think at that point, that would have been 2015, maybe. Yeah, it was 2015, early 2015. And that was where the passion kind of for the lost up here were born for my wife and I. And so three or so years later, we ended up here. It's a crazy story. At the time, the church was a year and a half old. The only way for me to be up here was to clean the church and lead worship for the church, which I'm sure Jay will get into how that custodian job ended.
Sometimes you have to fire people from portions of their job.
Yeah, so I was fired from the custodian position, rightfully so, honestly. Wasn't very good at it, but the worship stuck, which was good. But yeah, so we've been here for, it'll be, 2022 right now? It'll be 4 years also in May.
That's awesome.
That we've been here in Boston. It's been an incredible ride. It's a difficult area, and my perspective on ministry growing up in the South has been taken for a ride, and I'm loving every part of it.
Cool.
So.
Awesome. Well, listen, if you're joining us today, you're in for a treat. Josh and I want to have an open and honest conversation with our worship pastors, regarding what it looks like to have this unique relationship. I don't think it's a secret that one of the most, probably some of the closest relationships are had between pastors and their worship leaders. And so we're going to have a good conversation today. We're looking forward to that. Hang tight for just a moment, and we'll be back with that conversation and more in just a second. All right. Well, welcome back to the Pastor Pod. Again, we're here with Aaron and Grayson, Josh and I's personal worship leaders that will serve alongside us at the churches that we serve. And we're going to have a good, fun conversation. So Grayson and Aaron, we really want to encourage you to be transparent and open. This is not something that's supposed to be scripted. And so please be open with us. And so listen, I want to start off, what are some of the common misunderstandings between worship pastors and, pastors? What are some of those common misunderstandings that often take place that, behind closed doors are had, or maybe even in your office when you get done meeting with your pastor, you're like, I wish we would stop having that conversation. What are those misunderstandings? Are there the misunderstandings? Again, want to hear from you. So what does that look like?
Go for it, Aaron.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Okay. All right, I got it. So I was just thinking of how it's funny how after a service, someone might come up and pay me a compliment of, wow, that song really fit with the sermon, as if like it was just by chance. You know what I mean? Like, wow, the Holy Spirit was really working with you picking that song, and it's kind of funny that the expectation is that, I think it's common where the worship leader does his thing, the pastor does his thing, and you just kind of hope that it all works out on a Sunday, and it's the Holy Spirit working if they just match up, And so for me, like as a worship pastor, I had to grow in this a little bit, is just communicating with the pastor beforehand and kind of praying together over the message. And, it's a lot of communication during the week to make sure that everything that we say from the platform on Sunday is like a united message that we can put all together. And I was just thinking, like every worship leader, I think, or I hope is a worship leader because they've had experiences where in worship, that were so amazing, where we just felt the heart of God, that we're like, I want to lead worship, like I hope we've all had that moment as worship leaders where we say, I love leading worship because I've been so blessed in times of worship. And then I also think the same is probably true of pastors. Like, I think every pastor has had a moment in worship where they're just like, wow, they love worship. Like, I don't think the pastor's just solely concerned about the sermon. And then they're just like, I'll just let the worship team do what they do. I think they're just as passionate about worship as the worship pastor. And then I think the same should be true with like the sermons. The worship pastor should be just as passionate about the sermon as he is about the worship. And so I feel like the common misconception might be like worship pastors just care about the music. The pastors just care about the sermon. But you really have to have a heart for both, because God communicates through both of those times. And in the same way that I've been so affected by experiences in worship, like the Holy Spirit's definitely convicted my heart during sermons, and through God's word. And so I think there's a misconception of like, worship pastor just does worship and that's his focus, and the pastor just focuses on the sermon. And my hope is, that we both are all passionate about both aspects because of how the Holy Spirit speaks through both of those things.
That's
that
good.
Makes sense.
It's good.
So
Very good.
Yeah, man, that's great. I completely agree. It does take an effort. For instance, Jay's great about having his scripture and where he's headed with a sermon set out well in advance, and we share that through a platform, and then we always talk about throughout the weekend, especially the day of, where are you going today? Like, well, if they're going to walk away with one thing, what are they going to walk away with? And that has to affect the song choices we make, but it also has to affect what we as worship leaders do and say in between and during those songs, because it all ties back to one, the message of the gospel that we're trying to reach people with who are there in the room who may need that, but also the direction and the vision of the church, partners and believers that are with us on this journey. We're not just haphazardly speaking good content and singing good content. We are always focused in on a mission of where we believe God is leading our church and where he's taking us. And so every time we are, wearing a microphone or standing in front of one, it's important to be unified in that direction and that vision. And so that's something that I think happens intentionally through talking through the service, talking through a series, talking through even, the plan for a year. But I think it also happens through chemistry, and that chemistry happens kind of out of the office. And that's where I find, there have been lots of times that Jay and I have just been at his house having dinner, with our families, and sometimes there will be some shop talk about what we're excited about, what we're thinking about, things that we wouldn't formally bring around the table with the rest of the staff, but things that we're dreaming about. And in ways like that, both through, talking about absolutely nothing and talking about the things that we're excited about in the future, it kind of regenerates that passion and that heart that's attached to the vision that we're always striving for. And so I think it's important that there be a working friendship as well as a working relationship between a worship leader and a pastor.
How do you guys feel I don't know if Josh has ever done this or not, but I have a tendency sometimes to put my hand in the cookie jar. And so Grayson,
I like cookies.
Grayson gets on me all the time. Actually, if you I don't know if I should say this or not. I'm going to. I don't care about it.
You should.
Like we no, what I mean is we
open
actually,
and honest conversation.
We named one of our internet one of our internets at the church,
our staff internet,
based off of what
what
Jay,
you
get your
do.
hand, get your hands in the cookie jar, because there'll be times, and I want to know your opinion on this, right? So would you rather or not rather? Okay. So this is not
Okay.
like you're picking on what pastor does or not, but would you rather or not rather, if a pastor's working throughout the week, we're deliberating on our sermon. You guys are, working through the worship and what that looks like, that aspect. And again, we want them to gel together. The pastor is doing his sermon and, preparing. And then he's like, I think this song right here would really go well with my message. All right. Now, Josh, you're laughing, but I mean, I've done this more times than I think I should have, maybe. I don't know. But how does that sit? How does that go over well? And I want to hear from the worship leaders. Okay. And Grayson, this is a great chance for you to say, stop doing that to me. And that's okay. All right. I'm probably not going to stop, but still.
Sure.
Is it like Carmen and stuff like that? Is that what he wants you to sing, Grayson?
Yeah,
Or is
yeah.
it-
Well, the champion song, Carmen, from
yeah,
like the early
champion.
90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it like current stuff or is it?
You're so.
Yeah.
You're
It's
so,
usually
you're
Listen,
so
if I'm doing a
dumb,
Carmen
Josh.
song-
in our song thing for sure, which is important. But yeah, no, I think this is my personal opinion, because I know that some people struggle with that. For me, it's really helpful because usually he doesn't just say, hey, he doesn't shoot me an email and say, listen, I want this song for the end, or if you could work this song, it goes with my sermon. He breaks down, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm going to say, this is what I'm going to do, and I really think that this part of this song would be really cool with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he includes me on the vision of why he wants that song. He doesn't just tell me he wants that song. I think that's the difference maker in terms of he's not stepping on toes at that point. He's bringing us on the inside. He's bringing me on the inside of where he sees the service going. So if it's communicated well, I think that's actually really helpful for me, at least, because I'm doing the best that I can to go in the direction he's going. So if he specifically can tell me this is the direction I'm going and this is the song that's in that direction, that's really helpful for me.
What about you, Aaron? I'd love to get your feedback on that, because I mean, obviously, I work with Grayson, and I don't know if Josh does that or not. Josh, I don't know if you do that or not. Josh is a little smile. I can't tell from your face.
I just can't get over the cookie jar. It just makes me laugh. Yeah, I want to hear it from Aaron as well.
That's good.
All you can think about is cookies.
I love cookies. Yeah.
Honestly, so Josh's wife Cassidy is one of our worship leaders. Basically, she sings a lot and she has awesome musical taste that's similar to mine. And so she's like, I feel like she's probably my buffer. You know what I mean? Like Josh will probably be like, "What do you think of this song?" And I'm really grateful that Cassidy can be like, "No, I don't know about that." But I think what is helpful, like Grayson was saying, when you communicate far in advance, and I can see what the sermon series is going to be the next month and what the topic's going to be, I can already have a sense of what type of songs I want to put in that set list.
Right.
And so, for the most part, I don't think Josh usually gives me specific songs to put in a set list. But it's helpful to know ahead of time so that you can already plan ahead and be like,
Right.
This is a sermon about the prodigal son, so I'm going to be talking about a song that deals with running to the Father. You know what I mean? And so if I can pick a song that's already within our list of songs that we do, that's a win. And so, but I mean, I would not want Josh to be hands off, like I want his input on our songs because it shows that he cares. It's better than the opposite of a pastor just like, yeah, just do your thing,
Right. Yeah, I feel like that's the extreme other.
Yeah. And in the same way, like I would hope that I'm as receptive to Josh with song requests as he would be if I were to be like, hey, we're talking about this. Here's something that you could use in your message. You know what I mean?
That's totally unacceptable.
Absolutely. Oh, that's funny. No, I love that. I think it's so important to have foster that spirit of having a teachable spirit, fostering a spirit of feedback, and knowing that we have each other's back, that we're here to help each other. I think I've been around, church. I grew up as a pastor's kid. I just remember I don't know, just sometimes of course, I grew up in a church where like Sunday night, they would just yell out, what do y'all want to sing? And they'd pick a hymn. and the the pianist is over there trying to figure it out. So it's not at all like it is today. Thank the Lord. But I love that we're able to talk about it beforehand, do feedback afterwards, talk through transitions. But I mean, Aaron does a great job. He's in tune. I mean, I don't really have any instances where he's picked a song where I was like, oh man, why is he singing Carmen? No, I'm just kidding. But like, why, why? Because he has a good.
Josh has got a thing with Carmen.
I don't know what it is about Carmen today, but
it's that boxing song,
it's that boxing song.
It
gets me amped up before I work out. No, I'm kidding.
There you go.
But yeah, I do think having communication both ways is important. And I love that it's more of a culture of like friendship than it is, hey, you only have 13 and a half minutes. You do your thing and then I'm doing my thing, which is very unhealthy if that's the case in some churches.
Sure.
So we're looking for a healthy working relationship environment.
Yeah.
So this has been good. And so the hope here is that if you're listening to the Pastor Pod, one, if you're listening and you're not on staff at a church, and you're wondering what it's always like, do these guys ever talk? Are they working together? How does it work? As Aaron said earlier, when, I feel like those two were meant to be together, they plan that. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. You can't take the picture out of what the Holy Spirit and God is doing in our worship gatherings. But I want to lean in a little bit and give you guys a chance here, because I think you guys have been really good about being nice and kind, and I love Josh and I love Jay. And no, I don't think there's any animosity in there. But here's what I want to actually ask you guys, and this is not meant to be an attack or anything like that, but I want to really lean in. What are the most challenging aspects and parts of a pastor worship leader kind of working relationship? And when I ask that question, it's more along the lines of like, man, I just hate when sometimes I don't know what's going on, or when there's not the communication. It can be something. It's not a personal attack to Josh or myself or anything, but I think it's helpful to get it on the table and talk about it. Like, what are some of the most frustrating parts of the job that you've been called to do, the area you've been called to lead, that that you maybe even struggle the most with, and go, hey, these are the things that I think are the hardest part about this relationship or this job role, this role that I have in the church, and specifically when it comes to this. So does anything come to mind when I start asking this aspect of the challenging part, the most challenging aspect of the relationship, the working relationship between the pastor and the worship leader?
Yeah.
I knew Grayson would be first.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I was just waiting for it.
Here's your opportunity. Here's your opportunity.
I have two completely separate thoughts. The first one is, when you have kind of that working friendship that I talked about earlier, you have to be careful as the worship leader, particularly, not to blur that line, because there is still, hierarchy is a bad word for it, but we are working within the vision that God has given the leader of our ministry. And sometimes your head can get a little big and you start competing with that. And that's where I find that there's sometimes conflict, is when you're fighting for authority or power or whatever it may be. It could be something as small as, I don't want to do that song, I want to do this song. Or it could be like a larger, direction of where we're headed with the ministry. And so Jay knows that it's been a while, because I've been working on myself, but Jay knows that we've had those headbutts in the past.
He usually drops the, like, I felt like the Lord was leading me to do this. That's usually what he tells me.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
Jesus juke. But yeah, so I think understanding the understanding your role while maintaining that closer relationship is important, and knowing when to take a back seat and let the pastor do what he's supposed to do, which is drive the church. And so that is one thing that I thought of. The other one is sometimes communication, and this one's kind of a new perspective for me, because if you'd asked me, if you had asked what my role was a year and a half ago, it would have had nothing to do with graphic design or web design or social media or shooting videos or any of the stuff. And so sometimes, and I've seen this a little bit in my experience with Jay, but most of my experience with this has come from another church, a couple other churches that I've spent time with. It's not, a lot of that stuff takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, sometimes a lot of equipment, sometimes money that we don't have, you know, and so sometimes there can be ideas that come up that can be done, but there are way more hoops to jump through than he might see. And Jay's a dreamer, and he's 1,000 miles down the road, and I look 2 feet in front of me and like to see every single step and how we're going to get there. So some of that's our roles, but some of that's also just our personalities. And so having an open line of communication in good faith and goodwill of, hey, this is what's actually possible. I'm not trying to be lazy, or the vice versa of that is, hey, I know that this can be done. Stop being lazy.
Yeah. No, that I'm agreeing with you, Grayson. That's hard
Yeah.
because a lot, like the lead pastor, their job is to give vision,
Sure.
not necessarily to do the things that lead up to that vision. You know what I mean? Like we're doing a
Yeah.
lot of the practical setting stuff up, getting
Mhm.
things ready, and you don't want to be a lazy worker, you know, but you know what I mean? You want to give your all.
No, yeah,
But
absolutely.
sometimes it's frustrating when you're planning things and in my head, I'm thinking of all the things that have to be done. And Josh is
Exactly.
just thinking it's going to be awesome when it's done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh dear.
Yeah.
But you need that. You need that.
Well, there's a
I
balance.
can-
There's like a healthy rhythm there, because it's like I forget who told me, he said you want to lead people, not drag them, or you know, you cast it, or you understand the personalities of who you work with, so you don't brainstorm with people that they're not ready. Like we're not ready to formulate the plan, but don't start all that with certain parts of the team, because they're going to be in a tailspin thinking we're going to do all those things when really, and I'm a verbal processor, so I'll be
Mhm.
thinking as I'm talking, which is also really challenging to follow. And so I try to preface it, hey guys, I'm just thinking right now, so just to try to say, like, I'm not making all these decisions. I'm just
Right.
just you know, we're whiteboarding, you know, we're dreaming, you know. And so
Right.
that can be challenging, because it could be taken as good night. We can't do all that. I mean, we're just have you lost your mind?
I think one
So-
thing that Jay has done really well that's made this easier is, instead of saying, I want to do this, he starts the conversation with, can we do this? And that, from a creative standpoint, that completely changes the attitude of the person receiving that. Of like, okay, I'm being asked for my input here. I'm not just being given a task.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, it frees you to say if it really is not possible, or if there really are a lot of things that are going to have to happen for it to be possible. It's an opportunity to communicate that. So that's been a bit a difference maker.
Yeah, Grayson saying that I'm a dreamer might be a little bit of understatement. It's more of a
For sure.
spaghetti vomiter, because I just throw up all over the wall and
Yeah.
hoping something sticks. And that's a horrible
That's
image,
the
right?
MO.
We went from cookie jar
Wow.
to spaghetti.
I
Literally,
like the cookie jar better. I like the cookie jar better.
so there's literally, I can come in with 50 ideas
Yeah.
and we'll see which one sticks. And usually that
Mhm.
leads people in that tailspin that you're talking about, Josh. And so I think having the staff that can understand their leader as well, and you have to own that. So I own that as well. I own that I
Mhm.
can be confusing at times. So I try to end the conversations with like, all right, what do I need to clarify?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's like, what are we doing? Kind of concept. But I think that's
Yeah.
real. And thank you guys for being as real and transparent as possible, because I think it's helpful to see both sides of the spectrum. Because as a lead pastor, as a pastor, it can be challenging to go, well, I don't understand why people aren't getting what I'm saying, or why this is so challenging. Why is that so challenging? Because oftentimes we are driven by vision. We're driven by where we know God is taking us. And I've actually learned over the years, it's a learning process for me. I've had to learn that I got to be cautious with what I communicate and how I communicate, because oftentimes what I found, and this is just what I found, is God often shows me where we're going before it needs to be communicated. Like I know it, but if I communicate at that point, I could scare the daylights out of somebody, or, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So yeah, knowing that is just it's good. So this has been helpful. I want to ask one more question, because I think this is kind of really where it kind of comes to, is this concept of what is the most helpful way a pastor can support a worship pastor. In your mind, if you're going, if I could be supported to the best, if I could, because this is really the pastor's job, is to do everything we can to build up those that are leading alongside of us, not under us, but alongside of us, and build you up to the point where you can live out your calling. And so if there's pastors that are listening, which there's pastors that are listening, and they have a worship leader at their church, or worship pastor at their church, director, whatever title they want to give them, what would you say is what is helpful from a pastor? And you've mentioned a couple things, and you can reemphasize those, but what are some helpful ways that pastors can support and really help worship pastors live out their calling at the church, and succeed in the ministry that God's called them to?
Well, I think the more you communicate, the better off you're going to be. And especially when you disagree on something, understanding where each other is coming from and having those conversations where you're both candid, you know what I mean? And I also think if you're not meeting with your pastor on a week-to-week basis about what's, we meet every Monday, and we'll say, okay, let's talk about what was good about yesterday, and Josh is very encouraging in those moments, because we always start with the good, which is
yeah.
Sometimes we'll come into those Monday meetings and we know
Mhm.
there's a lot that went poorly the day before on Sunday, but that's always good for us to just talk about the wins that we had coming from a Sunday. And he's good at vocalizing, like, no, that you did a great job leading worship. And I'll talk about some of the things he said in his message that really hit me, that were great. And so communicating not just the bad things, but also the things that went well, it's very affirming. And you know what I mean? It just kind of lifts you up. But also, once we get through the bad, we talk about, okay, what can we fix for next week? And that all of that stuff is, how can we make it better? And so for Josh, he does a good job at encouraging me, but he also, you got to push each other and say, okay, here's what you can do better. I'll say, yeah, when you did this in your message, maybe in the future you could not say something like that, or and just kind of giving each other, how can we be better for next Sunday? If you're not communicating every week like that, then I can see how you can be frustrated with that relationship of not knowing what the other person's thinking and where they're coming from. So just having those week-to-week meetings where you're constantly encouraging and pushing each other, I think that's the most helpful thing we do in that worship lead pastor role.
Yeah, the feedback's important for me, because I don't want it just to be a feedback of the worship or the flow or the transition, but I want them to also give me feedback. And I know that's hard to give feedback to the pastor or whoever, or whatever the title is of the person who preaches. But it's got to start with me. It's got to start with us, that we ask for feedback. And of course, you want to be encouraged, but also, like Aaron said, I want to make sure there's not blind spots, that I'm not miscommunicating, that what I'm saying is coming across in the way that it should be. So every week, I want to get better. And so I lean on Aaron and then the rest of the team that's in that meeting to be honest with me, and say, hey, I love this. Hey, maybe try this. Watch out for this. So that protects me. It helps me. And it's got to start with us as the lead pastor, senior pastor, whatever that title is. We have to be the ones to ask for it, because typically, of course, and I was a youth pastor for many, many years, I've only had one pastor I work with that ever asked me for feedback. And I learned the most from him, because he would ask me and I would always say, man, it was amazing. And he's like, okay, thank you for that, but what can I do better? And I was like, I don't know how to do this, but it taught me that you never stop learning, no matter how old you are, how long you've been in ministry. So anyway, that's just a sidebar, but I feel like Aaron does a great job of giving me feedback, and he's very kind in how he does it, but he can also, I hope you do feel the freedom to say, hey, lay off the jokes about this. You're killing me. So whatever it is. So
Yeah. No, that's good. As leaders, being able to receive feedback is so important, because I don't know about you, Grayson. I have a tendency as the worship pastor to give a lot of feedback to my band, and to model receiving feedback, it just creates an atmosphere of we're all trying to get better, instead of I'm perfect and try to be like me. We're modeling how to receive criticism, which is really hard for me. I've had to grow in that a lot lately. So
yeah, I read someone say give encouragement emphatically and give feedback gently, is what I've heard. That stuck with me. So, all right, I'll be quiet now. I want to hear what Grayson has to say.
Well, as someone who's over the production as well, feedback is a trigger word for me, but someone got that, I'm sure. But I think it's important to have the freedom to kind of speak into each other's life like that. And we do that, we meet Mondays as well with kind of the main leadership team, and we talk about Sundays and what went well, what didn't go well. I think another thing, specifically from like a pastor to a worship leader direction, something that's been beneficial, that I think can be beneficial to both, is giving your worship leader some freedom and a higher ceiling. Jay mentioned a little bit ago when he asked the question about, the goal of the lead pastor is to build his team up. He's building leaders and not just filling roles. And I think that's a great way to look at it. Sometimes that can be scary because, some worship leaders are interesting people to give responsibility and authority to. I've had a worship leader or a few worship leaders that I've worked with that would be a challenge. But I think taking a step of faith and intentionally wanting to, my Siri's going off over here. Intentionally wanting to see your worship leader grow in his ministry and what God's called him to, I think will ultimately, you'll see a huge growth in the leaders within your creative ministry, and honestly, you'll see an uptick in just the growth of your church as a whole. So I think it's mutually beneficial, but giving some room for trial and error has been a huge, especially in a young church. We've been around for 5 years and we're still finding our footing on some things. Having that room to stretch has been a big difference maker in just my experience with ministry and my growth in my personal ministry, but it's also strengthened the relationship between us.
That's good stuff.
This is
Jay,
good.
I can't hear you. I think I lost you there for a minute.
No, you're
there?
good. You're good. Yeah.
You're back with us.
So this is good. So I've jotted down 3 big ideas of what you guys said when it comes to what are most helpful way for a pastor to support worship pastors, worship leaders. Open communication, giving honest and receiving honest feedback, giving and receiving honest feedback, and then Grayson, that providing freedom and not kind of micromanaging, which could be detrimental to
Absolutely.
a relationship, is the micromanaging and giving the freedom. I can just speak for, myself, but, every person has a vital role to play if we've been called. And the goal is for us to work together, collaborate together, and for the purpose of not just putting on a worship gathering or hosting an event, but helping lead people to a deeper and greater understanding of who they are in Christ. And so this relationship between the pastor and the worship pastor is extremely important, and one that cannot be really captured only in a short podcast. And so I want to thank Aaron and Grayson. Thank you guys for joining us today on the Pastor Pod. And thank you for spending some time with us and sharing and being open. Getting to the point where you can be open and kind of sharing a little bit. I think that's helpful. We'd love to hear feedback from you. If you're listening to this, give us some feedback, some questions you might have, and maybe something we didn't cover or something you'd like us to cover. Josh, how can they do that if they wanted to? How can they get a hold of us, and how can they reach out to us?
You make sure you let us know on social media. Our email address is thepastorpod@gmail.com. Make sure you subscribe, and you could also review the podcast to, spread it out. Hope it can be an encouragement to you and some other leaders. And if you didn't know, our intro song, Aaron put that together and did an amazing job. So if you go back to the intro of this podcast, that's Aaron Miller's awesome, cool ability to put that together. So thanks, buddy, for doing that.
I'm assuming he also does the outro, right? It's all instrumental, but he also
all of
so
both.
You're about to hear him shredding.
You're about to hear him shred.
Shred's not the right word. Shred's not the right word.
No,
it's not cool anymore.
I can't keep up.
And he also wrote another version of it. It has not made it on the air yet, so I don't know if we want to play it here at the end, Jay. It's an awkward song that Aaron wrote. I appreciate it. What do you think, Aaron? Would you like to?
Let's go awkward.
So I have 3 girls, and so I'm constantly playing the ukulele and making up songs that are mostly silly. And so if we do post, I keep that in mind that this is just silliness. This is me being silly. So
it's all good. It's all good.
Sometimes the inspiration just hits you.
So I think we need to plug it in here at the end for all right. Of our listeners.
Well, I'll cue it up, and we'll leave to the ukulele and some fun from Aaron. But listen, thank you so much for joining us here on the Pastor Pod. Reach out to us, thepastorpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions. Stay tuned for the ukulele. We'll hope to see you back next week and the weeks ahead, as we're going to be continuing to welcome on some good high capacity leaders here in the near future. So have a great week, and we'll catch you next time here on the Pastor Pod.
Pastor Pod, Pastor Pod, Pastor Pod, the Pastor Pod, Pastor Pod, the Pastor Pod, like to talk about God. Pastor Pod, the Pastor Pod, Pastor Pod, the Pastor Pod, Pastor Pod, the Pastor Pod. Josh has a nice Pastor Pod. Josh has a nice Pastor Pod. Josh has a nice Pastor Pod.